Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. The thing about working nights in Kings Canyon is that you learn the difference between natural sounds and the ones that don't belong. After 3 years as a ranger, I could tell you what every crack of a branch meant, could identify bird calls in my sleep, knew the rustle of deer through underbrush versus the heavier tread of black bears. But that night in October 2017, the sound that woke me was something I'd never heard before, a scream that started human and ended as something else entirely, echoing off the canyon walls like it was being torn from multiple throats at once. I sat up in bed at the Grant Grove cabin, my heart hammering against my ribs. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:47 a.m., its red numbers the only light in the pitch-black room. I held my breath, listening, but the forest had gone silent in that unnatural way that happens when predators are near. Even the insects had stopped their chirping. Then came the voices. At first they were distant, barely audible over the blood rushing in my ears. But they grew louder with each passing second. Desperate, high-pitched, terrified. Two voices, both female, both screaming words. I couldn't quite make out but understood in the most primal part of my brain. They were running from something. I threw off my blankets and grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand, my hands trembling as I pulled on my boots over bare feet. I was still in my sweatpants and t-shirt. But there wasn't time to change. The voices were right outside now, and then came the pounding, frantic fists against my cabin door, the sound of fingernails scraping against wood. Please. Oh God, please help us. It's coming. I yanked open the door and the two women practically fell into my cabin. The blast of cold October air that came with them carried something else, something that made my nostrils flare, the metallic tang of fresh blood and another smell underneath it, musky and wrong, like rot and wet fur combined. The beam of my flashlight swept across them. Both were in their mid-20s, wearing hiking clothes that were torn and muddy. But it was the one on the left that made my breath catch. She had a jacket tied around her shoulder, and even in the dim light I could see the dark stain spreading across the fabric, blood, and a lot of it. She was pale, her lips tinged with blue, and she clutched her arm with a grip so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Inside now," I said, stepping back to let them in. I slammed the door behind them and threw the deadbolt, then turned on the overhead light. The sudden brightness made all three of us wince, but it also revealed the full extent of the horror. The injured woman's jacket was soaked through, blood dripping onto my floor in steady drops. Her friend, a brunette with wild eyes and scratches across her face, was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she looked back at the door like she expected it to burst open at any moment. "Sit," I commanded, pointing to my bed. The injured woman collapsed onto the floor instead, her legs giving out beneath her. Her friend dropped to her knees beside her, hands hovering uselessly over the wound, afraid to touch it. I grabbed my first aid kit from the cabinet and knelt beside them, my ranger training kicking in despite the fear crawling up my spine. "I'm Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a park ranger. You're safe now. What's your name?" "Emma," the injured woman gasped. "And this is Sarah." Her voice was weak, thready. She was going into shock. "Okay, Emma, I need to see the wound. This is going to hurt, but I have to look." She nodded, her jaw clenched. I carefully unwrapped the jacket from her shoulder, and my stomach dropped. It was a bite wound, but not like any I'd ever seen. I'd dealt with bear attacks, seen what mountain lion teeth could do, even once treated a ranger who'd been bitten by a rattlesnake. This was different. The bite was massive, covering her entire shoulder, with deep puncture wounds that went down to the bone. But the pattern was wrong. The teeth marks were too large, too numerous, arranged in a semicircle that suggested a jaw nearly a foot wide, and the edges of the wound were ragged, like whatever had bitten her had tried to tear the flesh away rather than just pierce it. "What did this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that terrified me more than the wound itself. Absolute, unshakable certainty that she had seen something impossible. "We don't know," she said, her voice cracking. "We were camping at Azalea Campground. We heard something moving around our tent around midnight. Something big. We thought it was a bear, so we stayed quiet, stayed still like you're supposed to. She swallowed hard. But then it started talking. Talking. I grabbed gauze from the kit and pressed it against Emma's wound. She hissed in pain but didn't pull away. Not like words, Emma said through gritted teeth. But it was making sounds, like it was trying to speak, like it was mimicking us from earlier, from when we were sitting by the campfire. It kept repeating the same phrases over and over in this wrong voice. A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard stories from other rangers, late-night tales shared in dark cabins about things in the park that didn't make sense. Hikers who vanished without a trace. Campers who fled in the night, leaving everything behind. Strange vocalizations recorded on trail cams that sounded almost human but not quite. I'd always dismissed them as campfire stories, urban legends meant to scare rookies. We tried to wait it out, Sarah continued, wrapping her arms around herself. But it didn't leave. It circled our tent for almost an hour, getting closer, making those sounds. Then it started scratching at the fabric. I applied more pressure to Emma's wound, but the bleeding wasn't stopping. She needed proper medical care. Needed stitches, maybe even surgery. My radio was on the table across the room, and I reached for it with my free hand. "And then?" I asked, pressing the call button. "This is Ranger Walker at Grant Grove. I have a medical emergency. 2 civilians, one with severe trauma to the shoulder. Requesting immediate medical evac." Static crackled back at me. Then Tom's sleepy voice. "Copy that, Marcus. What's the nature of the trauma?" I hesitated, looking at the wound, at the 2 terrified women in my cabin, at the darkness pressing against my windows. "Animal attack," I said finally. "Possible bear. I need you to call it in and get here ASAP. Bring the medical kit and your weapon." "Roger that. ETA 5 minutes. I set down the radio and looked back at Sarah. "You were saying?" "The tent ripped open," she said, her voice hollow. Not unzipped, ripped. "And this thing reached in and grabbed Emma. I saw its hand, Marcus. It wasn't a paw, it was a hand, but wrong, too long, with these black claws. It pulled her halfway out before I grabbed her legs and pulled back. We fought over her for what felt like forever but was probably just seconds. Then it bit down on her shoulder, and she stopped, her whole body starting to shake. It looked at me," she finished in a whisper, "right in the eyes. And I swear to God there was intelligence there. It knew exactly what it was doing. It wanted us to be terrified." Emma had gone quiet, her eyes fluttering closed. Her pulse was rapid and weak under my fingers. I elevated her legs and covered her with a blanket, trying to keep her warm, trying to fight the shock that was settling into her system. "How did you get away?" I asked. "I had a flare gun," Sarah said, "for emergencies. I managed to grab it from my bag and fired it right into that thing's face. It dropped Emma and ran off into the trees, and we ran. We didn't even grab our stuff, we just ran until we saw your lights." A bang on the door made all 3 of us jump.
"Marcus, it's Tom."
I rushed to the door and opened it to find my fellow ranger, a grizzled man in his 50s with more experience in these mountains than anyone else in the park. He took one look at the scene and his expression hardened. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, setting down his medical kit and kneeling beside Emma. He'd been a combat medic in the Marines before becoming a ranger, and his hands moved with practiced efficiency as he assessed her injuries. "We need to get her to a hospital. This is beyond our ability to treat. Did you call for an evac?" "You just got here," I said, confused. "I mean air evac. Helicopter. This girl needs surgery." "Right. Yes." My mind was foggy, struggling to process everything. I grabbed the radio again and made the call. The dispatcher said a helicopter would be there within 30 minutes, weather permitting. Tom had started an IV line and was pushing fluids, doing everything he could to stabilize Emma. While he worked, I pulled Sarah aside. "Where exactly were you camping?" "Site 12. We left everything there. Our tent, our packs, everything." "And which direction did you run?" She pointed northeast. "We followed the road once we found it. We'd been hiking for maybe 20 minutes before we saw the cabin lights." I did the math in my head. If they'd been running scared through the dark, stumbling and panicking, their actual campsite was probably less than a mile away. Close, too close. Tom looked up at me, and I saw my own thoughts reflected in his eyes. We both knew what had to happen next. There was a wounded, aggressive animal out there, close to populated areas. Park protocol was clear. We had to locate and neutralize the threat. But looking at Emma's shoulder, at that impossible bite pattern, I wasn't sure what we were dealing with was actually an animal. The helicopter will land at the clearing near the visitor center, Tom said. I'll take these two down there and wait with them. You need to call this in to headquarters, get a team assembled. We should wait until daylight, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they wouldn't fly. Whatever did this to her is injured and aggressive. It's not going to wait until morning to attack someone else. Tom's voice was firm. The voice of someone who'd seen combat, who knew that hesitation could cost lives. He was right. But every instinct I had was screaming at me that this was wrong, that we were in over our heads. I'll call it in, I said. We'll get a team together and do this right. By the time the helicopter lifted off with Emma and Sarah, the sky had just begun to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The pilot had taken one look at Emma's wound and gotten her loaded in record time, not asking questions, just doing his job. But I'd seen the unease in his eyes as he'd looked at those bite marks. He'd known, just like Tom and I knew, that something wasn't right. 30 minutes later, 6 of us were gathered in the park headquarters building, a small wooden structure that served as our operations center. Besides Tom and me, we had Rangers Linda Chen, Mike Rodriguez, and the park's wildlife specialist Dr. Jennifer Hawks. We'd also called in Sheriff's Deputy Carl Morrison from Three Rivers, who had experience with dangerous animal situations. I'd laid out the photos I'd taken of Emma's wound on the conference table, and everyone was studying them in grim silence. That's not a bear, Dr. Hawks said finally. She was a woman in her early 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of scientific mind that didn't jump to conclusions. If she said it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a bear. The bite radius is too large and the tooth pattern is all wrong. Bears have 42 teeth, but this, she pointed to the puncture wounds, this has too many contact points, and they're too evenly spaced. Could it be a mountain lion? Deputy Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. No. Cougars have different dentition entirely, and they don't bite like this. They go for the throat or the back of the neck. They're ambush predators, not confrontational. Dr. Hawks set down the photos and looked around the table. I can't identify this bite pattern. It doesn't match any large predator native to California. Then what are we dealing with? Linda asked. She was the newest ranger on our team. Only 6 months on the job, and I could see the fear creeping into her expression. I don't know, Dr. Hawks admitted, but whatever it is, it's dangerous and it's injured. The flare gun Sarah fired would have caused damage, possibly to the face or eyes. That makes it unpredictable. Tom leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. The girl said it was making sounds, trying to talk. Many animals can mimic sounds, Dr. Hawks said, but she didn't sound convinced. Ravens, jays, even some mammals. But that level of sophistication, trying to mimic human speech patterns. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We need to get out there before full sunrise, I said, standing up. Site 12 at Azalea Campground. We find this thing, we track it, and we neutralize it. We go in teams of 2, maintain radio contact, and nobody goes off alone. Understood? Everyone nodded. Deputy Morrison handed out ammunition. We'd all be carrying rifles loaded with slugs, enough stopping power to drop a bear. I hoped it would be enough. We drove to Azalea Campground as the sun finally crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful given what we were about to do. The campground was mostly empty this time of year, with just a handful of tents scattered among the sites. As we approached Site 12, I could see why Emma and Sarah had chosen it. It was set back from the road, nestled against a thick grove of sequoias that provided both privacy and shelter. It was also the perfect ambush site. We parked at the campground entrance and approached on foot, weapons ready. Tom and I took the lead while Linda and Mike flanked us, with Dr. Hawks and Deputy Morrison covering our rear. The morning air was cold enough to turn our breath to mist, and the only sounds were our boots crunching on gravel and the distant call of a Stellar's jay. When we reached Site 12, we stopped. The tent was destroyed. Not just ripped open, but shredded, torn into ribbons of nylon and mesh that hung from the poles like tattered flags. The girl's belongings were scattered everywhere. Clothes, food, sleeping bags, all of it strewn across the campsite like a tornado had hit. But what drew my attention were the claw marks. They were everywhere. Gouged into the picnic table, carved deep into the trunk of a nearby sequoia, scraped across the metal fire ring. Each mark was roughly 4 inches long, parallel grooves that spoke of immense strength. "Look at this," Dr. Hawks called out. She was crouched near the tent examining something in the dirt. We gathered around her. Footprints. Dozens of them pressed into the soft earth. But they were wrong. All wrong. They were roughly human-shaped. A heel, a ball, 5 toes. But they were massive, easily 18 inches long and half as wide. And the proportions were off. The toes were too long, the arch too high, the depth of the impression suggesting something that weighed far more than a human should. "What the hell?" Mike breathed. Dr. Hawks pulled out her phone and took photos from multiple angles, her hands shaking slightly. "These are bipedal tracks," she said. "Whatever made these walks upright on 2 legs. Could it be a hoax?" Linda asked hopefully. "Someone in a costume trying to scare campers?" Deputy Morrison shook his head. "No costume could make these claw marks. And look at the depth of these tracks. Whatever left these has to weigh at least 400 pounds, probably more. The pressure distribution is real. You can see where the weight shifted as it moved." "Follow the tracks," Tom said. "See where it went." The trail was easy to follow at first. The prints led away from the campsite into the trees, heading northwest deeper into the park. We followed single file, weapons ready, every sense on high alert. The forest around us felt hostile now, the shadows between the giant sequoias seeming to shift and move with phantom shapes. After about a quarter mile, the tracks led us to a small clearing, and that's where we found the blood. It was splattered across the ground and painted up the trunk of a tree in arterial spray patterns. But it wasn't Emma's blood. This was too much and in the wrong location. Something else had died here recently. "Deer," Dr. Hawks said, kneeling beside what remained of the carcass. It had been torn apart with savage efficiency, the meat stripped from the bones, the organs missing entirely. Female black-tailed, maybe a year old, killed within the last few hours. "It fed," Tom said grimly. "After the attack on the campers, it came here and fed, which meant it was still in the area. Close by. Watching, maybe." I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. The sun was fully up now, but the forest canopy was so thick that it felt like twilight beneath the branches. Anything could be hiding in those shadows, and we wouldn't see it until it was too late. "We need to set up a perimeter," Deputy Morrison said. "Get some more people out here. If this thing is territorial, it might come back." As if in response to his words, a sound echoed through the forest. It started as a low rumble, almost like a growl, but then it changed, rose in pitch, became almost melodic. And then, clear as day, we heard words. "Help us, please help us." It was Emma's voice, or something so close to Emma's voice that it might as well have been. The same terrified tone, the same desperate plea, but there was something underneath it, something that made it sound like a recording played through water, distorted and wrong. "Oh God," Linda whispered. "It's mimicking her. It's mimicking what she said." The voice came again, from a different direction this time. "Please." Then another direction. "It's coming." It was all around us, circling, playing with us. "Back to back," Tom shouted. "Form a circle." We pressed together, each of us facing outward, rifles raised. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The voice kept coming, kept shifting, now adding Sarah's voice to the mix. The two voices overlapping and echoing until it sounded like a dozen terrified women were surrounding us. And then through the trees about 50 yards ahead of me, I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It looked almost human. The silhouette was humanoid, standing upright on 2 legs. But it was too tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more, and it was covered in dark matted fur that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its arms hung too low, reaching past where its knees should be, ending in those long black claws we'd seen marks from. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. It was watching us with eyes that glowed faintly amber in the shadows, eyes that held that same intelligence Sarah had described. And as I stared at it frozen, it opened its mouth, a mouth too wide, filled with too many teeth, and spoke in Emma's voice. "Help us." Then it smiled. "Fire," someone shouted, and the morning erupted with gunfire. I don't remember who fired first. Maybe it was Tom, maybe Deputy Morrison. All I know is that suddenly the forest was alive with the crack of rifle shots and the sharp smell of gunpowder. I squeezed my own trigger, saw bark explode from the tree where the creature had been standing a second before, but it was already gone. The thing moved faster than anything that size had any right to move, disappearing into the undergrowth like smoke dispersing in wind. We fired another volley into the trees, but we were shooting at shadows now, at the memory of where it had been rather than where it was. "Cease fire," Tom bellowed. "You're wasting ammunition." The gunshots echoed off the canyon walls and faded into an oppressive silence. We stood there breathing hard, smoke curling from our rifle barrels. I realized my hands were shaking. "Did anyone hit it?" Mike asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "It moved so fast." "That's impossible," Dr. Hawks whispered. Her scientific mind was clearly struggling to process what we'd all just seen. Nothing that large can move that quickly. The musculature required would be... Another sound cut her off. Not the mimicked voices this time, but a roar deep and primal and filled with rage. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through my chest like I was standing too close to a speaker. "Move." Tom grabbed Linda's arm and started pulling her back toward the campground. "We need to fall back to the vehicles, now." We ran. There's no shame in admitting it. Whatever that thing was, we were outmatched and we knew it. We crashed through the underbrush, no longer trying to move quietly, focused only on getting back to the relative safety of the campground. Behind us I could hear it following. Not running, not hurrying, just walking with those long, loping strides that covered ground faster than our panicked sprint. And it was still making sounds, still mimicking, but now it had added our voices to its repertoire. I heard Tom's shout of "move," repeated back at us with mocking precision. Heard Mike's labored breathing recreated in surround sound. Heard my own voice saying "what the hell" over and over from different directions. We burst into the campground and made for the trucks. Deputy Morrison was fumbling with his keys when something massive struck his vehicle from above. The roof caved in with a shriek of metal, and suddenly the creature was there, perched on top of the truck like a gargoyle, staring down at us with those amber eyes. Up close, in full daylight, it was even more terrifying. Its fur wasn't just dark, it seemed to shimmer and shift, making it hard to focus on, like looking at something through rippling water. Its face was a nightmarish blend of human and ape, with a protruding snout filled with irregular teeth that looked like they'd been sharpened on stone. Dried blood crusted its mouth and chest, and I could see a burn mark across one side of its face where the flare gun must have struck it. "Spread out," I yelled, and we scrambled away from the vehicle. The creature's head swiveled to follow us, that unsettling grin never leaving its face. Dr. Hawks was closest to it when it jumped. One moment it was on the truck, the next it was airborne, covering the 15 feet between them in a single bound. She screamed and fired her rifle from the hip. The shot went wide, but the muzzle flash made the creature recoil, giving her time to roll away. It landed where she'd been standing, and I finally got a clear shot. I aimed for center mass and squeezed the trigger. The slug caught it in the shoulder, and black blood sprayed across the gravel. The creature howled, a sound of genuine pain this time, not mimicry, and whirled toward me. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we locked eyes. And in that moment I understood what Sarah had meant about the intelligence she'd seen. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. Something that thought and planned and understood exactly what it was doing to us. Then Tom's rifle barked twice, and the creature jerked as both rounds found their mark. It dropped to all fours, that too long reach making it look spider-like, and bounded away into the trees, moving impossibly fast despite its injuries. We didn't chase it. We stood there, weapons trained on the tray line, waiting for it to come back. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the drip of black blood from Deputy Morrison's destroyed truck. "Is everyone okay?" Tom finally asked. We checked ourselves. Scratches, bruises, ringing ears from the gunfire, but no major injuries. We'd gotten lucky. "We need to evacuate the park," Dr. Hawks said. Her face was pale but determined. Get everyone out of here until we can bring in a proper team to deal with this. What is it? Linda asked, her voice small. What did we just see? Dr. Hawks looked at the blood on the ground, then at the claw marks on the truck, then back at the forest. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral, the voice of a scientist trying to make sense of the impossible. I don't know. The Native American tribes who lived in this area had stories about a creature they called Ciatco, a wild man of the woods who stole people and mimicked voices. The Spanish explorers wrote about something similar in their journals, something they called El Salvaje. Every culture that's lived in these mountains has had legends about something like this. She paused. I always thought they were just stories, myths to explain disappearances and strange sounds in the night. And now? Deputy Morrison prompted. Now I don't know what to think. We made it back to headquarters and immediately began the evacuation. Every camper, every visitor, everyone in the park was told to leave. We didn't tell them why, just cited a dangerous animal situation and a temporary closure. Within 3 hours, Kings Canyon was empty of civilians. But we stayed, along with a team from Fish and Wildlife, 2 FBI agents who specialized in unusual cases, and a group of academics who'd been studying cryptids for years. They set up equipment, trail cameras with motion sensors, audio recording devices, even thermal imaging. They treated the whole thing like a scientific expedition, which I suppose it was. For 3 days we hunted. We found more tracks, more signs of its presence. We found 2 more kill sites, a coyote and a bobcat, both torn apart with the same savage efficiency, but we never saw the creature again. On the 4th day we found its den. It was deep in the back country, miles from any trail, hidden in a crevice between 2 massive granite boulders. The smell hit us first, a mixture of rot and musk so strong it made my eyes water. Inside we found bones, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, ranging from small animals to something uncomfortably human-sized. We found scraps of clothing too, some of them decades old based on the style. And we found it. It was dead, curled in the back of the den like it had crawled there to die. The wounds we'd inflicted had gotten infected, and without modern medicine, sepsis had done what our bullets couldn't. Even in death, it was terrifying. 8.5 feet tall, weighing close to 600 pounds according to the team who moved it. The scientists took samples, measurements, photographs. They debated what to call it, Gigantopithecus, though that was supposed to be extinct, Sasquatch, though that was supposed to be myth. In the end, they just cataloged it as an unknown species and quietly moved it to a facility somewhere for further study. The official report listed it as a bear attack. The park reopened 2 weeks later. Emma recovered, though she still has nightmares and a vicious scar on her shoulder. Sarah refused to ever go camping again. And me. I transferred to a different park the following spring. I told myself it was for career advancement, but the truth is I couldn't stand those mountains anymore. Couldn't stand the shadows between the trees or the sounds in the night. Because even though they found the creature, even though it was dead and gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't alone. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those mimicked voices. Emma's plea for help. Sarah's terrified screams. My own voice shouting warnings. And I wonder if there are others out there in the deep wilderness. Others that learn to watch and wait and use our own voices against us. I wonder, but I don't go looking for answers anymore. Some questions are better left unasked. Some truths better left in the dark. Because now I know what's really out there in those mountains. And I know it's been watching us far longer than we've been watching it. There exists in every person's life a memory so vivid, so utterly transformative, that it divides their existence into 2 distinct parts, before and after. For me, that division occurred on a September morning in 2015, when I was 16 years old. What I witnessed in the woods behind my family's home that day shattered my understanding of safety, of human nature, and of the thin membrane that separates ordinary life from unthinkable violence. The forest had been my refuge for nearly 3 years by then. While other teenagers my age congregated at the mall or spent hours on social media, I found solace among the towering oaks and sprawling pines that stretched for miles behind our subdivision. The wooded area was vast, perhaps 200 acres of relatively untouched wilderness that somehow survived the suburban sprawl consuming the rest of our county. Local developers had tried multiple times to purchase the land, but it remained protected by some environmental ordinance I didn't fully understand and didn't care to question. I was simply grateful it existed. My routine had become sacred. 3 or 4 times a week, I would return from school, grab my weathered backpack containing a water bottle, granola bars, and whatever book I was reading, and disappear into those trees. My parents had grown accustomed to my absences. Just be home before dark, my mother would call after me, barely looking up from her laptop where she worked remotely. My father, when he wasn't traveling for business, would occasionally ask where I'd been. The woods, I'd answer, and that seemed sufficient for him. The forest offered me something I couldn't find anywhere else: true solitude. Not the hollow loneliness of eating lunch alone in the school cafeteria, but the profound peace of being genuinely completely alone with my thoughts. I knew every trail, every distinctive rock formation, every massive fallen log. I had favorite spots: a flat boulder near a trickling stream where I'd read for hours, a small clearing where sunlight broke through the canopy in golden shafts, a ridge overlooking a valley where I could see for miles. I encountered wildlife regularly. White-tailed deer would freeze and watch me with liquid brown eyes before bounding away. Gray squirrels chattered irritably at my intrusion. Once I'd spotted a red fox, its russet coat brilliant against the green underbrush. These encounters felt special, like small gifts from the forest itself. The woods represented everything good about solitude: the gentle rustling of wind through leaves, the complex perfume of decomposing vegetation and pine sap, the soft carpet of moss and fallen needles beneath my feet. On that particular Saturday morning, September 12th, I woke early despite having no real obligations. The weather forecast promised one of those perfect early autumn days where summer's oppressive heat had finally broken, but winter's cold hadn't yet arrived. Through my bedroom window I could see clear blue sky and trees just beginning to show the faintest hints of gold and orange. By 8:30 I'd eaten breakfast, packed my bag, and was heading out the back door. My mother was still asleep. My younger brother, 13-year-old Tyler, sat in front of the television playing video games, barely acknowledging my departure with a grunt. The trailhead began at the edge of our backyard, a worn dirt path that countless feet had created over the years. Our neighborhood of roughly 40 houses backed up to the forest, and while most residents never ventured into the woods, enough people used them for the main trails to remain clearly defined. I stepped into the tree line at 8:47 a.m. I remember checking my phone before the signal grew weak and felt the familiar sense of leaving civilization behind. The temperature under the canopy was noticeably cooler, the air richer and damper. Morning dew still clung to spider webs stretched between branches, creating intricate patterns of silver in the filtered sunlight. Birds were active at this hour: cardinals, blue jays, the occasional woodpecker hammering at a tree trunk. I walked slowly in no particular hurry, enjoying the absolute freedom of a day with no schedule, no expectations, no one waiting for me to be anywhere or do anything. I followed the main trail for approximately 20 minutes, walking at a leisurely pace, occasionally pausing to examine interesting fungi growing on decaying logs, or to watch a caterpillar inch its way across the path. The trail forked in several places, creating a network of routes through the forest. Most people, on the rare occasions I encountered them, stuck to the widest, most obvious paths. But I had long since abandoned that caution, preferring to explore the narrower trails, and frequently to venture off-trail entirely. At the third fork I made a choice that would alter everything. Instead of continuing straight on the main path, which would have taken me to my usual reading spot by the stream, I veered right onto a less traveled trail. Something about the morning felt special, electric almost, as if the day itself was charged with possibility. I wanted to explore, to see something new, to venture into a part of the forest I hadn't visited in months. This particular trail climbed steadily uphill, winding through increasingly dense vegetation. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and gnarled, their bark rough and deeply fissured. Moss grew in thick patches, creating a carpet of green that softened the landscape. The canopy overhead was so dense that the trail existed in a kind of perpetual twilight, sunlight only occasionally breaking through in narrow beams that illuminated floating dust particles. As I climbed, my breathing became heavier. I was reasonably fit from all my hiking, but this was a genuine incline, steep enough that I occasionally used my hands to pull myself up particularly sharp rises. The trail here showed less evidence of human traffic. Fallen branches crossed the path in places. Undergrowth encroached from both sides. I had to duck under low-hanging boughs and step carefully over roots that had erupted through the soil. After another 15 minutes of climbing, the trail leveled off onto a kind of plateau. I'd been here once before, months earlier, but had continued on to explore beyond. I paused to catch my breath, taking a long drink from my water bottle. The forest around me was utterly silent, except for the occasional bird call and the whisper of wind through the high branches. This deep into the woods, even the distant sound of traffic disappeared entirely. I was about to continue forward when I noticed something unusual. To my left, maybe 30 yards off the trail, light penetrated the forest in a way that suggested a clearing. The woods were full of small clearings, places where old trees had fallen, creating temporary gaps in the canopy. But something about this one drew my attention. Perhaps it was the quality of the light, brighter than the surrounding dimness. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. Whatever the reason, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I stepped off the trail. Pushing through the underbrush, I navigated around tree trunks and over fallen logs, making my way toward the clearing. Branches caught at my jacket and backpack. Dry leaves crunched beneath my feet despite the morning dew. As I drew closer, I could hear something unusual, a rhythmic sound, like metal striking earth, accompanied by heavy breathing and what might have been muttered cursing. Someone was there. Someone was digging. My first thought was innocent enough. Perhaps a wildlife researcher was taking soil samples. Maybe someone was burying a beloved pet. The logical part of my brain searched for reasonable explanations, even as something deeper, more instinctive, whispered warnings I couldn't yet articulate. I slowed my approach, moving more carefully now, trying to minimize the noise of my footsteps. Through the thinning trees, I caught my first glimpse of the clearing, and the figure within it. It was a man, and he was indeed digging, but not with a shovel. He was using his boot, kicking dirt frantically over something on the ground. The motion was desperate, panicked, entirely different from the methodical work of someone engaged in a legitimate task. I stopped behind a massive oak tree, its trunk easily 5 feet in diameter, and peered around the edge. The clearing was roughly circular, perhaps 40 feet across, created by the fall of several large trees that now lay decomposing on the ground. Sunlight poured into this space, making it seem almost unnaturally bright compared to the surrounding forest. The man stood in the center, his back partially toward me, focused entirely on his task. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a powerful build that suggested physical labor. He wore jeans and a dark jacket despite the mild temperature. His hair was dark, cut short, and even from this distance, I could see sweat staining the back of his shirt. But what seized my attention, what made my stomach clench with the first real tendrils of fear, was what he was trying to bury. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The human brain, I've since learned, resists accepting certain realities. It searches desperately for alternative explanations, for ways to make the incomprehensible fit into the framework of normal experience. But there was no alternative explanation for what lay partially exposed in the dirt before him. It was a human hand. Pale, fingers slightly curled, unmistakably real and unmistakably dead. The hand protruded from the disturbed earth at an unnatural angle, and as the man kicked more dirt over it, I caught a glimpse of the wrist, the forearm, all with that terrible waxy pallor of lifeless flesh. The world seemed to tilt. My vision tunneled. Every cell in my body screamed contradictory commands. Run, hide, scream, do something, do nothing. I pressed myself against the oak tree, bark rough against my cheek, and tried to control my breathing, which had suddenly become loud and ragged in my own ears. The man continued his frantic work, muttering under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but his tone carried a desperate, angry quality. He kept looking around, scanning the tree line, his movements jerky and paranoid. I realized with sudden horrifying clarity that he was afraid of being discovered. And that meant if he found me, if he knew I'd seen what he was burying, I would be in immediate mortal danger. I don't know what sound I made. Perhaps I gasped, perhaps my foot shifted on the dry leaves beneath me. Perhaps he simply sensed my presence with whatever dark instinct guided him. But suddenly, the man stopped his frantic digging and stood perfectly still, head cocked, listening.
Who's there?
His voice cut through the forest silence like a blade. It wasn't loud, but it carried an edge of violence that made my blood freeze. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line systematically, and I pressed myself more tightly against the oak, praying its massive trunk would hide me completely. "I heard you," he called out, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. Come out right now." Every instinct screamed at me to stay perfectly still, to become invisible, to will myself to simply disappear. But my body had other ideas. My breathing was rapid and shallow. My legs trembled. Sweat broke out across my forehead despite the cool air. And then, in a moment of terrible misfortune, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound, though muffled by denim and the fabric of my jacket, seemed impossibly loud in that moment. "There you are," he said, and started walking toward my hiding place. Panic overrode thought. Without making a conscious decision, my body simply reacted. I pushed off from the tree and ran. Behind me, I heard him shout, a wordless bellow of rage, and then the sound of his pursuit crashing through the underbrush. I ran without any plan, without any clear sense of direction, guided only by the overwhelming need to put distance between myself and the man who wanted to silence me. The forest became a blur. Branches whipped at my face and arms. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. My backpack bounced painfully against my spine. I could hear him behind me, closer than seemed possible, his heavy footfalls and harsh breathing mixing with my own panicked gasps. I risked a glance backward, a mistake. My foot caught on a root and I stumbled, nearly falling, barely catching myself on a young sapling that bent under my weight. The moment of hesitation cost me. The man was perhaps 20 feet behind me, his face twisted with fury, one hand reaching forward as if he could simply grab me from that distance. Terror gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. I righted myself and sprinted downhill, abandoning any pretense of staying on a trail. The slope was steep and treacherous, but it was also the fastest way to put distance between us. Gravity aided my flight, pulling me forward in a barely controlled plunge through the forest. My descent became almost a fall, each footfall barely controlled, my arms windmilling for balance. Behind me, I could hear the man's pursuit, punctuated now by his shouted threats. "You're dead. You hear me? Dead." The words penetrated my panic, confirming what I already knew. He meant to kill me. This wasn't about scaring a trespasser or teaching a kid a lesson. If he caught me, I would become another body buried in those woods, another unsolved disappearance that would haunt my parents for the rest of their lives. The image of Tyler, my younger brother, flashed through my mind. What would they tell him? How would my family survive not knowing what happened to me? These thoughts fueled my desperate flight even as my lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest. The forest seemed endless. Trees flashed past in a confusion of brown and green. I leaped over a fallen log, crashed through a patch of thorny undergrowth that tore at my clothes and skin, splashed through a narrow stream without breaking stride. Water soaked through my shoes, but I barely noticed. The only thing that mattered was speed, distance, survival. I could no longer hear the man behind me. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought perhaps I'd lost him. Perhaps the steep terrain had slowed him down, or he'd given up the chase. But I didn't dare stop or even slow down. I kept running, my path growing more erratic as exhaustion began to set in. My foot came down on wet leaves covering a slope, and suddenly I was sliding. I tried to catch myself, grabbing at saplings and branches, but momentum carried me down the muddy embankment. I hit the bottom hard, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. For several seconds I lay there gasping, tasting dirt, my ribs aching. Get up. The thought cut through the pain and disorientation. Get up or die. I forced myself to my hands and knees, then to my feet. My ankle throbbed. I'd twisted it in the fall, but it bore my weight. I looked around, trying to orient myself. The forest here was unfamiliar. In my panic, I'd run far from any trail I knew, but downhill, I reasoned, would eventually lead to the subdivision, to houses, to people, to safety. Then I heard it. The snap of a branch somewhere above me on the slope I just descended. He was still coming, still hunting me with the relentless determination of someone who had everything to lose if I escaped. I limped forward, then broke into an awkward run, as adrenaline overrode the pain in my ankle. The forest began to change. The trees here were younger, thinner, suggesting I was nearing the edge of the truly wild area. Through the foliage ahead, I caught glimpses of something that made my heart soar. A fence. The wooden privacy fence that marked the boundary of someone's backyard. Civilization. Safety. Witnesses who could protect me from the madman in the woods. I crashed toward that fence with renewed energy, no longer caring about the noise I made or the trail I left. Behind me, I heard the man's enraged shout as he realized I was about to escape his reach. His footsteps accelerated, branches breaking as he abandoned any pretense of stealth. The fence loomed ahead, 6 feet of weathered wood between me and survival. Without slowing, I leaped at it, my fingers catching the top edge. Pain shot through my arms as I pulled myself up, my shoes scrabbling against the wood for purchase. I was halfway over when I felt a hand grab my ankle. Terror gave me strength I shouldn't have possessed. I kicked backward viciously, connecting with something solid, his face or chest, I couldn't tell, and heard a grunt of pain. His grip loosened for just a moment, and I wrenched free, throwing myself over the fence. I landed hard on someone's lawn, the impact driving the air from my lungs again. But I was over. I was safe. I scrambled to my feet and ran across the yard toward the house, a 2-story colonial with a brick facade. Behind me, I heard the man hit the fence, heard him trying to climb it as I had. I pounded on the back door, screaming for help. Please, someone help me, please. The door remained closed. No one appeared at the windows. The house was empty, or its occupants couldn't hear me, or they were too frightened to respond to a hysterical teenager pounding on their door. I didn't wait to find out which. I ran around the side of the house, through a gate, and out onto the street. The suburban street was blessedly normal. Houses with neat lawns, cars parked in driveways, a mailman making his rounds 2 houses down. The ordinariness of it all felt surreal after the nightmare in the woods. I ran toward the mailman, waving my arms, trying to call out, but managing only a choked sob. He looked up, startled, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he took in my appearance. Clothes torn and muddy, face scratched and bleeding, eyes wide with terror. Are you okay? What happened? Call 911. I managed to gasp out. Man in the woods. He buried someone. He tried to kill me. The next hours passed in a blur of sirens, questions, and the overwhelming relief of being surrounded by people who could protect me. The mailman, whose name I later learned was George, had immediately called 911 on his cell phone and stayed with me until the police arrived. He kept asking if I was hurt, if I needed to sit down, but I couldn't stop staring at the fence line, terrified I would see the man emerge from the woods. 3 patrol cars arrived within minutes, followed shortly by an ambulance. Paramedics examined my injuries, scratches, bruises, the swollen ankle, while police officers questioned me. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words came out disjointed and frantic. A body, a man burying a body. He chased me. He tried to kill me. One officer, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, took my arm gently. Slow down, she said. You're safe now. We need you to tell us exactly what you saw and where. I tried to comply, but my thoughts were scattered. How could I explain where the clearing was, when I'd run in blind panic, when I'd never been to that part of the forest before? I gave them my best estimate. Up the right trail, maybe 45 minutes of hiking, then off trail to the left. Not enough information, I knew, but all I could manage. More police arrived. I heard someone mention K9 units. Search and rescue, crime scene investigators. The mailman had moved to his truck, but he kept glancing over at me with concern. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion, standing in clusters and whispering among themselves. An officer drove me home. My mother's face when she saw me, flanked by police with an ambulance pulling up behind us, would haunt me almost as much as the memory of that pale hand in the dirt. She went white, actually staggered, and had to grab the doorframe for support. He's all right, ma'am, the officer assured her quickly. Shaken up some minor injuries, but he's all right. Getting her to believe that took considerably longer. She wrapped me in a crushing embrace while simultaneously demanding to know what happened, who had hurt me, where I'd been. Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs, his video game controller still in hand, staring down at the scene with wide eyes. The living room became a command center of sorts. Police officers filled our house, tracking mud on my mother's carefully maintained carpet, asking questions, making phone calls. A detective arrived, a weathered man in his 50s named Lieutenant Hayes, who sat across from me with a notebook and pen and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I walked him through it. The decision to hike that morning, the choice to take the right trail, the sound that had drawn me to the clearing, what I'd seen, the chase. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his expression unreadable. "This man," he said when I finished. "Can you describe him?" I closed my eyes, bringing up the memory I wanted desperately to forget. Tall, maybe 6 feet. Dark hair, short. He was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, maybe navy blue or black. Strong build, like he worked construction or something physical. Age? I don't know. Older than me. Maybe 30s or 40s. I didn't see his face clearly until he was chasing me. And then, I swallowed hard. He looked angry, completely enraged. "Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" Yes. The answer came without hesitation. That face, twisted with murderous intent, was burned into my memory. By evening, the woods behind our neighborhood had transformed into something resembling a military operation. Police tape blocked the trails. Searchlights had been set up, their beams cutting through the gathering darkness. I watched from my bedroom window as officers and search dogs moved through the trees, their flashlights creating a constellation of moving lights in the forest. My mother had called my father, who was traveling for business in Denver. He was on the next flight home. In the meantime, she refused to let me out of her sight, hovering anxiously, asking repeatedly if I was sure I was okay, if I needed anything, if I wanted to talk to someone. Tyler kept his distance, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or the realization that his older brother had come terrifyingly close to dying that morning. The dynamic between us had always been competitive, occasionally antagonistic in the way of siblings, but that evening he approached me cautiously. "Did you really see a dead body?" he asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "That's messed up," he said. And for once there was no mockery in his tone, just genuine sympathy. Lieutenant Hayes returned around 8 o'clock, his expression grim. My mother showed him in, and I knew immediately from his face that the news wasn't good. "We found the clearing," he said, "and we found evidence of recent digging, but the body is gone." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Gone? He must have come back after your son escaped and moved it." Hayes looked at me. "We're treating this as an active homicide investigation. We found enough evidence to confirm that something was buried there recently. Hair, trace amounts of blood in the soil. We're processing the scene now." "But you didn't catch him," I said. It wasn't a question. "Not yet. But we will. We've got officers searching the area. Roadblocks set up. His description out to every department in the state." He paused. "I need you to work with a sketch artist tomorrow. The more detailed description we have, the better our chances of identifying this individual." Over the following days, I learned more about what the police had found. The hair recovered from the clearing belonged to a woman, blonde, probably in her 20s or 30s based on the forensic analysis. The blood confirmed that someone had died there, or at least been gravely injured. But without a body, without any other evidence, the investigation had limited leads. The sketch artist session was grueling. I sat for 3 hours, trying to remember every detail of the man's face. The shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes, the way his mouth twisted when he screamed at me. The final sketch looked wrong somehow. Flatter than the man I'd seen, but it was close enough to make my hands shake when I saw it. That sketch appeared on the news that evening, accompanied by a story about a suspected homicide in the woods. My name was withheld. I was a minor, and my parents had insisted on privacy, but the details were clear enough. Teen witnesses suspected murderer while hiking. Police searching for unnamed suspect. Public urged to call with any information. Days turned into weeks. School started again, and I returned to classes, though my concentration was shot. Friends asked what had happened. The rumors had spread quickly, but I couldn't bring myself to discuss it. My grades slipped. I stopped sleeping well, jolting awake at the slightest sound, convinced the man had found out where I lived and was coming to finish what he started. The police presence in our neighborhood gradually decreased. The search of the woods, which had been intensive for the first week, became more sporadic. Lieutenant Hayes would call every few days with updates that weren't really updates at all. No new leads, no identification of the suspect, no body recovered. 6 weeks after that morning in the woods, Lieutenant Hayes came to our house one evening. His expression told me everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "We're scaling back the investigation. Without more evidence, without a body, there's only so much we can do. We're keeping the case open, and if any new information comes to light, we'll pursue it aggressively. But active daily investigation is no longer sustainable," my mother argued, her voice rising in pitch as she demanded to know how they could just give up. But I said nothing. I understood. They had a sketch of a man who might not even be from this area. They had forensic evidence of a crime but no victim to identify. They had my testimony, which while credible told them little about who the man was or where he'd gone. The killer had simply vanished. It's been 9 years now since that September morning. I'm 25 years old, living in a city 300 miles from where I grew up. My parents sold that house 2 years after the incident. None of us could stand living so close to those woods anymore. Tyler is in college now. We don't talk about what happened unless we have to, which is rarely. I've tried to move on. I finished high school, went to college, started a career. I've been to therapy, learned coping mechanisms for the anxiety and hypervigilance that still plague me. I take medication for the insomnia. I avoid forests, parks, anywhere with too many trees and too few people. But I can't escape the knowledge that he's still out there. The man who killed that woman and God knows how many others is still breathing, still walking around free. Sometimes in crowds I find myself scanning faces, looking for him, wondering if I would even recognize him after all these years. Sometimes I wake at 3 in the morning, certain I've heard someone trying my door. The police told me to hope he's dead. Maybe he was killed in an accident. Maybe he died of natural causes. Maybe he's in prison somewhere for an unrelated crime. But hoping isn't knowing, and not knowing is its own special torture. Lieutenant Hayes retired 5 years ago, but before he did, he called me one last time. "I'm sorry we never caught him," he said. "I think about your case often, about that woman we never identified, never found, about you and what you went through. I'm sorry we couldn't give you closure." "Is the case still open?" I'd asked. "Officially, yes. Cold cases sometimes break decades later. New technology, someone coming forward with information. It happens. But we both knew it was unlikely. The trail had gone cold the moment that man moved the body. Without a victim, without physical evidence tying him to a specific identity, he had effectively committed the perfect crime. I tell myself that I survived for a reason, that bearing witness, even if it led nowhere, mattered somehow, that the woman he killed, whoever she was, at least had someone who knew she existed, who knew her death wasn't an accident or a disappearance but a murder. It's small comfort, but it's all I have. The woods where I almost died have been partially developed now. Half of the forest was cleared 3 years ago for a new subdivision. I wonder sometimes if they unearthed anything during construction, if they found other graves, if the man I saw that morning made a habit of burying his victims in those woods. I'll probably never know. And that's what truly haunts me. Not just the memory of that pale hand in the dirt, or the sound of the man's footsteps pursuing me through the forest, or the absolute certainty that I came within seconds of becoming another unsolved disappearance. What haunts me is the knowing that true monsters don't always get caught, that evil sometimes wins. Somewhere, that man is living his life. Maybe he's married. Maybe he has children. Maybe he's a neighbor someone waves to, a coworker someone shares coffee with, a stranger someone passes on the street without a second thought. Or maybe he's still killing, still burying bodies in forests where no one walks, still getting away with murder. I survived that day in the woods, but part of me will never leave that clearing. Part of me will always be 16 years old, frozen behind an oak tree, watching a murderer try to hide his crime, and knowing with absolute certainty that if he sees me, I'm dead. That's what I live with. That's what I'll carry for the rest of my life. The burden of being the witness who got away, the one who saw but couldn't save, the survivor haunted by the victims I'll never know the names of. The case remains open, the killer remains free, and I remain vigilant, always scanning faces in crowds, always listening for footsteps behind me, always remembering that September morning when I learned that true horror doesn't announce itself with music or warnings. It happens in silence, in sunlit clearings, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. That's the story I carry. That's the weight I bear. And until the day they find him, or until the day I die, it will never truly be over. My name is John Redtree. I'm 28 years old, and I live in a small apartment in Knoxville, Tennessee. I work as an accountant, spending my days crunching numbers in a cubicle. It pays the bills, but just barely. I've always felt a longing for something more in life. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved the outdoors. My happiest memories are of summer camping trips with my dad in the Great Smoky Mountains. We'd hike deep into the back country, pitching our tent beside bubbling streams, the scent of pine needles sharp in the air. At night, we'd sit around the campfire as shadows danced among the trees, sharing stories and gazing up at the star-studded sky. Out there in the wilderness, all my worries and anxieties would melt away. The petty concerns of day-to-day life no longer mattered. It was just me, my dad, and the vast untamed beauty of nature surrounding us. I lived for those precious weeks every year. But then I grew up, graduated college, got an office job, moved to the city. Slowly, that free-spirited part of me got buried underneath spreadsheets and rent payments and rush-hour traffic. When was the last time I spent a night in the woods, cooked food over an open fire, laid in a meadow and watched clouds drift by? Years. Too many years. Lately I've felt that old urge stirring in me again. That yearning to escape the concrete and computers, to return to the purity of the forest. I miss the peace I used to find out there. I desperately need to reconnect with that vital primal essence of myself. So I've made a decision. I'm going to take a solo camping trip, deep in the heart of the Appalachian Trail. No cell phones, no other people, no distractions. Just me and the ancient woods. I know it's risky to go alone. The trail can be dangerous. Steep drop-offs, wild animals, unpredictable weather. But the idea of facing those challenges excites me. I want to test myself against the elements, to push my limits and see what I'm really made of when stripped of modern comforts. Some of my friends think I'm crazy when I tell them my plan. They remind me of all the stories about the strange things that happen in those dense, isolated forests. Hikers vanishing without a trace, eerie sounds echoing from the trees at night, footprints that couldn't possibly be human. And of course, the old tales of Bigfoot stalking the shadowy hollows of Appalachia, a huge, foul-smelling ape-man that can rip a man limb from limb. People say if you go deep enough into the uncharted areas, you just might come face to face with a fabled monster. But I don't believe those silly campfire stories. I'm not a superstitious person. As much as I love the outdoors, I'm a man of science and reason at heart. Bigfoot and ghost stories are fun to tell around a crackling fire. But that's all they are, stories. The woods are vast, but they aren't supernatural. The only real threats out there are falls, exposure, maybe a bear attack at worst. Nothing I can't handle with proper preparation and common sense. I have a good map, quality gear, and years of backcountry experience under my belt. No, I won't let childish fears hold me back from this adventure, from returning to the place that makes me feel most alive and authentic. I know I'll find what I'm seeking out there, amid the timeless tranquility of nature. A reconnection, a renewal. I can hardly wait to shoulder my pack and set off down that winding trail, breathing deep that bracing mountain air. My true self is waiting for me in those misty hills and hushed glens. I just know it. Little do I suspect the primal horrors lurking in the primeval shadows of the forest, that I'm walking blind into an ancient realm of secrets mankind was never meant to discover, that soon I'll be plunged into a desperate battle for survival against an evil that surpasses human understanding. But for now, I'm still naively excited as I prepare for my solo journey into the Appalachian wilderness, a journey that will change me forever, in ways I can't begin to imagine. I wake before dawn on the morning of my trip, too excited to sleep any longer. I slide out of bed, my bare feet touching down on the cool hardwood floor. Shuffling into the kitchen, I brew a pot of strong coffee and sit at the table, sipping the steaming black liquid as I study my trail map one more time. My route is carefully charted in red ink, 50 miles over 5 days, cutting through the wildest, most remote stretches of the Appalachian Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. No established campsites, just bushwhacking off-trail to make camp wherever I end up each night. A true backcountry adventure. I'm a little nervous, but mostly I'm exhilarated. I've done plenty of hiking and camping before, but never a trip this ambitious. Never this far from civilization for this long. It's the challenge I've been craving. A chance to really push myself and see how I handle true wilderness isolation. After a quick shower and a final gear check, I sling my heavy backpack over my shoulders, lock my apartment door, and climb into my beat-up old Jeep. The morning fog hangs low as I pull out of Knoxville, the first rays of sun just starting to claw over the hazy blue ridges on the horizon. The drive out to the trailhead takes a little over an hour. The two-lane road winds up through craggy hills and mist-shrouded hollows. Out here, cell phone reception is spotty to non-existent. Already the busyness of human civilization is giving way to the stillness of nature. I reach the gravel lot where the trail begins and park the Jeep. A weathered wooden signpost marks the path leading off into the shadowy tree line. Appalachian Trail, Clingman's Dome, Indian Gap. Shouldering my pack, I grab my trekking poles and set off at a brisk pace. The trail is wide and well maintained here at the start. A tunnel of green foliage arches overhead, dappled sunbeams cutting through the leaves. The rich loamy scent of soil and growing things fills my nose. Birds sing unseen in the canopy as I push forward. A red-tailed hawk circles in the blue sky high above. A busy chittering alerts me to a chipmunk scampering over a fallen log. There's a new discovery around every bend, a jutting rock formation, a meadow full of wildflowers, a fast-moving stream tumbling down a series of small waterfalls. This is what I've been missing, cooped up in my city cubicle. This wild, vital energy, reconnecting with the smells and sounds and textures of the living earth, feeling my heart and lungs pumping, my muscles working, my senses sharpening, coming fully into my body. As the morning wears on, I settle into the familiar rhythms of the trail, the steady cadence of my boots on dirt, and my poles striking stone, the play of sun and shadow through the trees, the companionable solitude, alone but never lonely amidst the breathing forest. The path starts to gradually ascend as I push deeper into the mountains. Before long, I'm puffing and sweating with the exertion, but I welcome it. My pack is heavy on my shoulders, but my spirit feels lighter than it has in years. With every step, the outside world recedes further. The noise and grime and stress of civilization slough away. At last, I reach the point where the official trail ends, and the true backcountry begins. A small footpath, faint and crooked, branching off into untrammeled wildwood. On the map, it's marked with a dotted line and a warning. Backcountry area, no maintained trails. Enter at own risk. I smile and push forward without hesitation. The gnarled trees seem to swallow me up as I leave the last traces of mankind behind. The dense foliage quickly blots out the sun, plunging me into a cathedral of green shadows. An electric thrill runs through me. I'm finally doing it, venturing off the beaten path into the unknown. If only I understood what I was really walking into. If only I had heeded that warning more seriously. Because I'm about to learn the hard way that there are some very good reasons to fear the depths of the wilderness. That some trails are left untrod by human feet for a reason. I will soon discover that the farther you stray from the safe and the known, the more likely you are to encounter the things that hide in the shadows of the world, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their hungry embrace. The afternoon wears on as I bushwhack through the backcountry. The hiking is rugged and slow-going without a trail to follow. I pick my way over fallen logs, slippery with moss, scramble up steep rock faces, wade through hip-deep patches of stinging nettles. My muscles burn and my shirt is soaked through with sweat. Navigation is tricky under the dense canopy. I have to check my topo map and compass constantly to keep my bearings. The sun is only a gauzy light filtering through the leaves, making it hard to track its passage. Time seems to blur and warp in the endless green sameness. But I'm in my element out here. The challenges only energize me, making me feel sharp and alive. My senses are keenly attuned. The crackling of twigs underfoot, the spicy scent of crushed pine needles, the dart of color as a songbird takes flight. I'm fully present, thoughts of my stale routines and worries miles away. Late in the day, as shadows lengthen, I reach a suitable place to make camp for the night. A small clearing ringed with towering hemlocks alongside a fast-flowing creek. I shrug off my pack with a groan of relief, rolling my shoulders to loosen the kinks. I gather wood and kindling from the forest floor. Before long, I have a merry fire crackling, chasing back the gathering dark. I prop my soaked boots near the heat to dry and set a pot of water to boil for a pouch of chicken rice. As I wait for my dinner to rehydrate, I sit with my back against a smooth old oak and appreciate the night coming alive around me. The hiss and pop of the fire, the chuckling babble of the creek, a whippoorwill calling plaintively in the distance, fireflies winking in the black like fairies. It's deeply peaceful, but also a little eerie, if I'm being honest. Out here miles from any other human soul, the night feels thicker somehow, hushed and watchful. The fire holds it at bay, but there's a sense of something ancient lurking just beyond the circle of flickering light, something that resents my small intrusion into its domain. I shake off the fanciful notion and force down a few mouthfuls of my bland meal. I'm tired and aching from the long day's exertions. My overactive imagination is just a product of fatigue. Banking the fire, I crawl into my ultralight tent and wriggle into my sleeping bag. Sleep comes quickly. The burbling of the creek and the sighing of the wind in the branches, a soothing lullaby. Deep in the night, I'm jolted awake by a sound outside my tent. A heavy crashing, like something big blundering through the brush nearby. Branches cracking and leaves thrashing. My heart slams into overdrive. I fumble for my flashlight with shaking hands and sweep the beam across the tent wall. The nylon ripples in the breeze, but I don't see any silhouette or shadow moving out there. The sound passes and fades into the distance. Probably just a deer or a bear, I tell myself. Big animals are always active at night in these woods. It's no big deal. Still, it takes me a long time to fall back asleep, senses straining for any hint of further disturbance. Once or twice I think I hear a distant rhythmic thudding, like heavy muffled footfalls, but it's so faint I can't be sure it's not just the anxious drumming of my own pulse in my ears. The next morning dawns misty and cold. As I emerge from my shelter to stir up the fire, I notice broken saplings and trampled undergrowth just beyond the edge of the clearing. Whatever passed through in the night, it wasn't stealthy about it, but I see no tracks, no scat, no tufts of hair snagged on branches to give me a clue what it might have been. With a slight shrug, I put it out of my mind and focus on making breakfast and breaking camp. I have another long day of trekking ahead of me. If I had examined those snapped branches a little closer, I might have noticed they were all broken about 8 feet off the ground, higher than any deer or bear could reach. Might have seen the way the thin trunks were twisted, almost wrenched apart by incredible strength. But those details will only become clear later. In hindsight, for now, naively untroubled, I shoulder my pack and set off into the misty forest for another day of solitary exploration, not suspecting I'm being watched, being tracked, being hunted. The next few days pass in a blissful blur. Each morning I wake at first light, boil water for coffee and oatmeal, then break camp and set off. I let whimsy choose my path through the wildwood, following the curves of hills and creeks, chasing shafts of sunlight and wisps of birdsong. When I get tired, I rest. When I get hungry, I eat. When some impromptu wonder catches my eye, a profusion of wildflowers, a heart-stopping vista, the glint of mica in a stream bed, I stop to appreciate it. Out here there are no deadlines, no schedules, no expectations, just what adventure each moment brings. The physical challenges are formidable, but I relish them. Chimneying up a narrow crevice between two towering boulders, belly crawling through dense rhododendron tunnels on my elbows, leaping across a 15-foot gap to reach the next boulder in a series serving as dry stepping stones over a rain-swollen creek. My body grows lean and hard. My sense is keen as an animal's. I feel more deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature than I ever have before. The sun on my face, the breeze in my hair, the living carpet of the forest floor beneath my boots. I'm wild and free and alive, but the nights are different. Each evening when I make camp, as the sun sinks and shadows gather, a subtle unease starts to creep over me, an instinctive tightening between my shoulder blades, the little hairs at the back of my neck standing at attention. The nighttime forest feels pregnant with unseen menace. The strange sounds come every night now. That same heavy, clumsy crashing in the brush, closer each time, circling my lonely camp like a shark circling a raft. A prickling sense of being watched by unseen eyes. I tell myself it's just my overactive imagination. that it's totally natural to feel a little spooked alone in the deep woods at night. Our ancestors huddled close to their campfires for millennia, instinctively fear the dark places where predators lurk. It's just primal emotion, not stemming from any real threat. But no matter how I try to rationalize it, the skin-crawling dread is getting harder to shake off. Sleep comes in fitful snatches. The night spent tossing and straining my ears for the snap of a twig, the pad of an approaching footfall. On my 5th morning, I break camp as usual, trying to ignore my growing unease and exhaustion. I'm startled to realize I've lost track of exactly where I am in my wanderings. Yesterday, I neglected to check my map all day, too caught up in the simple joys of exploration. A rookie mistake. Pulling out my topo map and compass, I try to orient myself, but the terrain doesn't seem to match the squiggly lines and contours on the weathered paper anymore. These deep woods all look the same. Towering trees, craggy slopes, boulder-strewn creeks. No distinguishing landmarks to pinpoint my location. A trickle of real fear slides down my spine for the first time. What if I'm lost? Sucked so deep into the forested labyrinth that I can't find my way back out again. No one knows exactly where I am. No one is coming to look for me. Stop it, I scold myself harshly. You're being a head case. You've got a map and compass. Just calm down and trust your training. You're not lost, just turned around. Pick a direction and start walking. You'll hit a road or a trail eventually. Swallowing hard, I pick a bearing at random and set off. But as the day wears on, doubts gnaw at me harder. The forest seems to fold in on itself, the trees crowding close, the undergrowth thickening until I'm forced to fight for every step. I'm bushwhacking blind, clawing my way through strangling vines and clutching briars. The canopy overhead grows so dense that only thin shafts of sun penetrate the gloom. I can't see the sky to track the sun's passage anymore. The air feels thick and oppressive, hard to suck into my lungs. My progress slows to a wretched crawl. It's almost a relief when I burst out of the underbrush and find myself at the foot of a towering cliff face. At least it's a change of scenery, something to orient myself by. But my heart sinks as I crane my neck back, trying to spy the top. It seems to rise up forever, a sheer granite wall soaring dizzily into the sky, and my intended direction lies directly over it. There's nothing for it but to climb. Taking a deep breath, I find a handhold and heave myself upward. The stone is crumbly and treacherous, cracking off in my hands, my boots scrabbling for purchase. Before long, I'm 20, 30, 50 feet off the ground, clinging to the rock face like a spider. I'm just starting to think I might make it, the top coming into view, when a shelf of rock I'm standing on suddenly shatters under my weight. In an instant, I'm falling, plummeting sickeningly toward the jagged boulders far below. A scream rips from my throat. By some miracle, my flailing hands catch a vine and arrest my plunge with a bone-wrenching jerk. I dangle there panting, heart going like a jackhammer, not daring to move. The vine is as thin as my wrist, my palms slippery with sweat. If I put any weight on it, with an awful ripping sound, the vine tears free from the cliff face. And then I'm falling again, my terrified howl swallowed by the wind rushing past my ears. The ground rises up to meet me with dizzying speed. The last thing I see is a pair of huge hirsute feet, sunk deep into the moldering forest loam. Then everything goes black. Consciousness returns slowly, painfully. The first thing I'm aware of is a diffuse throbbing, my whole body one big aching bruise. I try to move and lightning bolts of agony shoot up my leg, drawing a hoarse cry from my cracked lips. Memories trickle back. The cliff. The fall. I must have landed badly, snapped my shin like a twig. How far did I fall? 50 feet? 100. By all rights, I should be dead. Every bone in my body shattered. I know I need to assess the damage, take stock of my injuries, but I can barely string two thoughts together. The pain is a living thing chewing at my mind, blotting out everything else. Some detached part of me recognizes I'm going into shock. Blinking blearily, I take in my surroundings for the first time. I'm lying crumpled at the bottom of the cliff in a world of hurt, but I'm not alone. Something is moving in the underbrush at the edge of the clearing. Something huge, shuffling, grunting. The heavy musk of wet animal fur and something fouler hits my nostrils, turning my stomach. 2 points of red light appear in the shadows between the trees. Eyes, endlessly deep and full of cold, alien intelligence. Slowly, ponderously, a gigantic shape detaches from the darkness and lumbers into the open on two legs, rising up and up to towering height. It's like something out of a nightmare, covered in shaggy, matted fur, powerfully muscled limbs, hands tipped with jagged claws, a face not quite ape, not quite man, something twisted in between, bared yellowed fangs. Horror explodes through me like icy poison, my scream strangling in my throat. I know what I'm seeing is impossible. I know that it can't be real. But the creature just regards me with those fathomless red eyes. Then it throws back its head and unleashes an ear-splitting roar that shakes the leaves from the trees, proclaiming its dominion. Its dominion over me. The agony in my shattered leg is like molten metal, searing and all-consuming. But it's nothing compared to the icy terror flooding my veins as the creature takes one ponderous step toward me. Then another. This can't be happening. It's not possible. That thing can't exist. I must be hallucinating. Maybe I hit my head in the fall. I'm concussed. This is all some pain-induced fever dream. But I can smell its rank animal musk. Hear the crunch of dry leaves under its feet. Feel the weight of that crimson gaze pinning me like an insect. It's real. It's real. And it's here. And oh God, it's coming for me. Adrenaline explodes through my battered body like lightning. Heedless of the white-hot spikes of pain radiating from my mangled leg, I'm scrabbling backwards in the dirt, clawing for handholds to try and drag myself away. But my pitiful efforts are useless. The creature takes its time in no hurry, stalking toward me with an almost lazy confidence. Why shouldn't it be confident? I'm helpless prey, no match for its brute strength and power. It looms over me, eclipsing the sun, casting me into shadow. Heat radiates off its furred bulk, its breath a fetid blast in my face. This close I can see the nicks and scars crisscrossing its leathery hide, souvenirs from past battles. I can see the bunching knots of muscle under the fur, the wicked curve of 6-inch talons. The creature reaches for me with one massive paw. I throw my arms over my head with a choked whimper, waiting for those claws to rend my flesh, for monstrous fingers to crush my windpipe. But it just seizes a fistful of my shirt, and effortlessly hoists me off the ground like a rag doll. My legs dangle uselessly, my broken shin at an obscene angle. I'm hopelessly snared in its grip, pinned by that hellish red gaze. Those eyes, there's a horrifying intelligence in their carmine depths, an ancient, pitiless awareness that roots me to my core. In that instant, I know two things with terrible certainty. This creature is no dumb brute. It's cunning, calculating. It didn't stumble upon me by chance. It's been stalking me this whole time, toying with me, herding me deeper and deeper into its forest to cut me off from any hope of escape or rescue. Those sounds outside my tent the past nights, that was the creature, circling, playing with its food before the kill. And it's done playing with me now. Time seems to freeze as we hang there in grotesque tableau. My heart a jackhammer in my chest, my breath coming in panicked gasps, the fetid heat of the monster's body suffocating. Then a guttural growl rumbles up from the depths of its barrel chest, a sound of dark hunger and deadly intent. Its jaws open wide, revealing rows of jagged fangs, a slick black gullet. It's going to devour me alive. A surge of desperate strength floods through me, and I'm struggling, kicking, beating at its chest with my fists, clawing for its eyes. Fear has shattered the bonds of rationality, reducing me to a writhing creature of pure atavistic panic. But it's like fighting a mountain. The creature doesn't even seem to register my feeble blows. It draws me closer to its open, slavering jaws, a low growl of anticipation buzzing in its throat. So this is how I die. Alone in this haunted forest, unmourned and unremembered, ripped apart by an impossible thing that shouldn't even exist. The searing inevitability of it crashes through me, despair rising up like a black wave to swallow me whole. I'm opening my mouth to let loose a final hopeless scream, but in that instant a sound splits the air like a gunshot.
Hey!
A human voice, rough-edged and furious. The creature and I both jerk our heads toward the source of the shout. A figure is striding out of the trees, big and rangy, clad in a battered ranger hat and a khaki uniform, and leveling the business end of a shotgun, straight at the monster's head with an air of deadly intent. "Drop him, you son of a bitch," the ranger bellows. "Right now. For a heartbeat." Everything hangs suspended. The creature and the ranger locked in silent battle. The man's eyes steely and unflinching, his finger tense on the trigger. The monster's arm bunches. Then, with a snort of disgust, it hurls me away from it like a broken toy, sending me crashing into the dirt. Agony flares white-hot in my leg, and I scream, my vision sparking out. Through a haze, I'm dimly aware of the monster uttering a final hair-raising roar of frustration. And then its hulking shape is turning, crashing off into the underbrush, swallowed up by the forest. Footsteps. Men shouting, "Hands on me." The ranger's face swims into view above me, grim and tight-lipped. "Easy now, buddy," he says gruffly, reassuringly. "I got you. It's over. You're safe now." Then the pain takes me and I spiral down into the mercy of unconsciousness. I come awake in stages, surfacing slowly from the deep well of oblivion. First, I'm aware of a steady mechanical beeping, then the sharp astringent smell of antiseptic, the starched rough texture of sheets against my skin.
Hospital? I'm in a hospital.
Memories start to filter back like jagged shards of a broken mirror. The cliff, the fall, the shotgun blast, the creature. Oh God, the creature. My eyes fly open with a gasp and I'm jackknifing upright, or trying to. Agony flares hot in my leg, and my vision strobes out for a second. Collapsing back onto the thin mattress, I take stock for the first time. My entire left leg is encased in plaster from hip to toe, suspended in a mess of straps and pulleys. An IV drips fluids into the crook of my elbow. The rest of me is a patchwork of bandages and fading bruises. Clipped to the sheet covering my chest is a plastic ID bracelet. John Redtree, followed by a bunch of inscrutable numbers and barcodes. "About time you rejoined us, Mr. Redtree," a voice says mildly. I whip my head around and blink in surprise. Perched casually in the chair beside my bed is the ranger. The same weathered face, the same khaki uniform, now sadly rumpled. His shotgun is propped against the wall within easy reach. What? I croak. My voice a barely recognizable rasp. My tongue feels thick and clumsy, my thoughts sluggish. Valley View Medical Center. The ranger supplies. "You've been out for over a day. Doctors had to put a lot of pins in that leg." He nods at my plaster prison. "Pumped you full of the good drugs, too." My heart slams against my ribcage as fractured bits of memory rise up screaming. The creature. Oh Jesus, the creature looming over me. Its rancid breath in my face, its claws in my flesh. "Easy there, bud, keep breathing," the ranger says, leaning forward to squeeze my shoulder. "You're safe here. It can't get you." I stare at him wild-eyed, my panic receding only slightly. What was that thing? The ranger sighs and scrubs a hand over his stubbled face. He suddenly looks very old and very tired. "What you saw out there, what you tangled with, we call it the Reaper." "The Reaper?" I rasp. That name conjures images of the black-robed, scythe-wielding personification of death. I shiver. "On account of how it butchers anything unlucky enough to cross its path," the ranger says grimly. "Deer, bear, hikers." He fixes me with a penetrating stare. "You're one of the few to see it and live to tell the tale, my friend. Not many it gets in its grip walk away." I swallow hard. "What is it? Where did it come from?" The ranger sighs again and settles back in his chair, folding his hands. "The truth is, we don't rightly know. Far as we can figure, it's some kind of relic hominid, a leftover from the age of cavemen that's managed to survive in the deep woods all this time. Maybe a Gigantopithecus, maybe something stranger." He shakes his head. "Whatever it is, it's been in these mountains for a long, long time. Longer than men have. The Cherokee tell stories about it that go back generations. They call it Sul-Kalu, the great owl. A demon of the dark woods that snatches unwary travelers." I shiver convulsively, the creature's red gaze burning behind my eyes. An ancient evil that's endured in secret for eons, spoken of only in whispers around campfires, until I blundered into its realm. "That's what you and your buddies do?" I ask hoarsely. Hunt monsters in the woods?" The ranger smiles thinly, in a manner of speaking. "Officially, we're just humble servants of the National Park Service, but we're the ones who patrol the deep zones. The places good upstanding citizens aren't meant to go. We keep an eye on the things that call the wild places home, keep them away from the tourist trails." I think of all the stories, the whispered legends of Bigfoot and Wendigos and gremlins in the night. Things I've always dismissed as old wives' tales. But now I've seen the truth with my own eyes, felt its claws in my flesh, and I know nothing will ever be the same. The world is so much stranger and darker than I ever dared imagine. The ranger seems to read my thoughts. He leans forward, face intent. Listen to me, son. You've had a hard dose of a reality most folks never have to face. You'll carry the scars of this encounter the rest of your days, outside and in. His eyes are like agates, fathomless and opaque. But you walk out of this hospital, you go home to your life, your people, and you don't look back, you hear? Stay out of the deep woods. Let the shadows keep their secrets. He sits back, his face softening. The Reaper, it'll stick to its hunting grounds. With any luck, our paths won't cross again. I aim to keep it that way. I swallow hard. As much as I long to bury this nightmare, to forget, I know he's right. I'll always carry this with me. The memory of the creature's red eyes, the heat of its breath, the strength in its hands as it lifted me like a child. I've ventured into the primal dark and glimpsed the hungry things that wait there, waiting for the unwary to stray from the safe paths and hearths of men. And I know bone deep that if I ever set foot in those mountains again, it'll be waiting for me. The Reaper in the night, pitiless and patient. I'm John Redtree. I'm 28 years old, and I've seen the face of a myth, looked into the abyss, and felt it look back into me. I'll never be the same, and I'll never ever go into the woods alone again. The idea of a week-long hiking and camping trip in the remote forests of northern Arizona had always appealed to me. I loved the outdoors and relished the chance to get away from the bustle of city life, immerse myself in nature, and enjoy some solitude. So when my good friend Jack invited me to join him on an expedition into the sprawling Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, I eagerly accepted. Jack was an experienced outdoorsman who had explored this territory before. "You're going to love it out there," he told me with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Just miles and miles of pristine wilderness, but I have to warn you, some of the locals say this forest is haunted by skinwalkers." I chuckled at that. Skinwalkers were nothing more than a Native American myth, I assured him. Evil witches who could transform into animals and wore the skins of the creatures they had killed. I didn't put any stock in such far-fetched supernatural tales. "I'm not so sure," Jack said, a glint in his eye. "The tribes around here have told stories about skinwalkers for generations. I've heard some pretty hair-raising accounts from people I trust. But you're right, they're probably just legends. Spooky campfire stories, nothing more." We planned our trip for early October. The brutal summer heat would have relented by then, but the deep winter snows hadn't yet arrived. It seemed the ideal time. We pored over maps, plotting out our route, selecting trails that would take us far off the beaten path into seldom visited corners of the immense forest. When the day finally arrived, we packed Jack's SUV with all our gear and provisions and set off, winding our way up into the mountains. With each passing mile, the trappings of civilization fell away, replaced by an untamed landscape of towering pines and aspens, sun-dappled meadows and steep ravines. We reached the end of the Forest Service road by noon and shouldered our heavy packs. "See you in a week," Jack said as he locked the vehicle. Then we set off down a narrow, overgrown trail, side by side, ready for our adventure to begin. If only I had known then what lay in store for us in those woods. We hiked until dusk that first day, stopping only briefly to rest and rehydrate. The air was pleasantly cool under the forest canopy, sunlight filtering down in thin beams through the fluttering leaves. The susurrus of the wind in the branches and the distant trilling of birds were the only sounds. "This is the life, isn't it?" Jack asked with a contented sigh as we trudged along, away from all the noise and the people and the concrete. "Sometimes I think I was born in the wrong century. I would have made a good mountain man living off the land. Alone except for the skinwalkers," I replied with a smirk. He shot me a raised eyebrow. "Joke all you want, but the stories do make you think." The Navajo believe skinwalkers are evil shamans, witches who perform dark rituals to gain their unnatural powers. They say the skinwalkers sacrifice their humanity to become something no longer human, something monstrous that kills without remorse. I shook my head dismissively. Just a scary story to keep people in line, if you ask me. Don't transgress against the tribe or the skinwalkers will get you. Probably dreamed up by some crafty shaman centuries ago. People have always used boogeymen to control behavior. Could be, Jack allowed. But the myths are so pervasive, across so many different tribes and cultures. The details are different, but the core is the same. An evil witch who shapeshifts into animal form. Where there's smoke, there's usually at least a little fire. We lapsed into silence then as the trail grew steeper and the shadows deeper in the waning light of late afternoon. It was nearing twilight when we finally reached the small draw Jack had identified on the map as our campsite for the night. Bone-tired, we dropped our packs and set about pitching our tents and building a campfire. Later, after a meager dinner of reconstituted beef stew, we sat on logs pulled close to the fire, letting the warmth drive back the night's growing chill. It was fully dark beyond the small circle of firelight. In the distance, an owl hooted mournfully. The dancing flames cast weird, undulating shadows on the surrounding trees. You know, there's one story about skinwalkers I heard that's always stuck with me, Jack said, poking at the fire with a stick. The tribes say if you lock eyes with a skinwalker, it can absorb itself into your body and take control. The only way to stop it is to pronounce the skinwalker's full name. But if you don't know the name, you're doomed. The skinwalker will destroy you from inside. An involuntary shiver went through me, and I edged a little closer to the fire. The wind gusted then, making the flames shudder and the shadows leap. It sounded almost like a low moan sifting through the pine boughs above. Perhaps sensing my unease, Jack laughed suddenly. Or so they say. But like you said, it's probably all nonsense. No different than werewolves or vampires or any other folktale monster. Nothing to worry about out here except maybe bears. And bears are scared of fire. Right, I agreed, managing a shaky smile. And there's two of us. We've got each other's backs. But I couldn't shake a vague sense of foreboding as I stared out into the Stygian gloom of the forest. Jack's words hung in the air, and in my imagination. He stretched and yawned loudly then, pushing himself up off the log. I don't know about you, but I'm beat. My dogs are barking. I'm going to turn in. I nodded, banking the fire with a stick. I'm right behind you. See you in the morning. As I lay in my tent a short while later, listening to the soft nighttime sounds of the forest, the stories Jack had shared continued to trouble me. They were just silly folktales. They had to be. Evil witches who could change into beasts and burrow into human bodies? It was utterly fantastical, and yet some dim ancestral part of my brain responded to the idea on a primal level. Every creak of branch, every rustle of leaf, took on an ominous cast. It was a long time before sleep finally found me, and when it did, my rest was fitful, and plagued by dark and disturbing dreams. We woke at first light, stiff and a little groggy, but eager to get back on the trail. After a quick breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, we broke camp, hoisted our packs, and set off again, aiming to reach a small spring marked on our map by early afternoon. Despite my unsettling dreams, the bright light of morning and the activity of hiking drove all thoughts of skinwalkers from my mind. The weather was glorious, the air crisp and infused with the scent of pine, the sky a bottomless blue. We made good time. As we angled down into another narrow draw, shortly after noon, the spring Jack had identified came into view, little more than a seep really, a jumble of lichen-encrusted rocks from which crystal-clear water burbled. We stopped gratefully to fill our canteens and bottles. It was then we noticed the first unsettling indication that we might not be alone in this isolated pocket of wilderness. There, in the soft mud at the pool's edge, was a perfectly formed human footprint. A bare footprint. "Hun," Jack said, squatting to examine it more closely. "That's odd. Can't be more than a day or two old. But who would be wandering around barefoot way out here?" I shook my head, bewildered. "No idea. Could it maybe be a kid from the reservation?" Jack frowned. "I don't think so. The nearest Navajo or Apache settlement is 50 miles south, and this print is from an adult foot." He stood, wiping his hands on his pant legs, and peered around as if half expecting the footprint's erstwhile owner to materialize from the trees. "Well, whoever it was, they're not here now. I wouldn't worry about it. Probably just some hippie out communing with nature or vision questing or something." But I found that I was worrying about it. That vague sense of unease from the previous evening returning. It was just a footprint, nothing overtly menacing about it, and yet something felt off, incongruous. The idea of someone traveling barefoot in this rugged backcountry was bizarre. We rested a while longer in the shade by the spring before setting off again. The trail turned steep and rocky, switchbacking up the far wall of the hollow. By mid-afternoon, we reached the ridge atop, both of us drenched in sweat and gulping air. But the effort was well worth it. I had to admit, the view was breathtaking. Unbroken forest sprawling out in all directions, the massive peaks of the White Mountains serrating the southern horizon. In that moment, with a cool breeze in our faces and that stunning panorama spread out before us, my misgivings melted away. We were in God's country. What could there possibly be to fear here? But then, as we began to descend along the ridge's spine into the next valley, I thought I caught a flash of movement behind us, out of the corner of my eye. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing to see but hazy blue distance. Jack noticed and glanced back as well. "What's up?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Nothing," I said a little too quickly. "I just thought I saw. Never mind. Probably a deer or something." He nodded, though I noticed he kept checking over his shoulder as we hiked on. There were no further signs of anything amiss. No sound other than our breathing and the crunch of our boots on the rocky trail. The woods seemed preternaturally still, as if the birds and small creatures were all holding their collective breath, waiting and watching. When we made camp beside a small creek that evening, the strange footprint and my fleeting sense of being watched still weighed on my mind. Jack must have noted my distraction as we prepared our dinner over the campfire. "You're still thinking about that barefoot print, aren't you?" he asked, cocking his head. I shrugged sheepishly. "A bit. I know it's stupid, but it just seems so weird. What do you really think it was?" He took a long moment to respond, chewing his lip. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "If you'd asked me yesterday, I'd have said definitely human. But now," he trailed off, shaking his head. "But now?" I prompted uneasily. Jack sighed, poking at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "Now I keep thinking about all those skinwalker stories. If the legends are true, if they really can take animal form, then maybe that print wasn't from a human foot at all." A shiver rolled through me, despite the nearby flames, and I hugged my jacket tighter. "You don't really believe that, do you? I mean, shape-shifting witches. That's crazy." "Is it?" he asked, meeting my eyes over the fire. "This is an old land with old secrets. Who knows what might be out there in the darkness, watching from the trees." As if on cue, a long, mournful howl sounded from somewhere on the moonlit ridges above us. Whether wolf or coyote, I couldn't say, but it raised the hairs on the back of my neck and sent a spike of icy dread down my spine. In that moment, alone and miles from civilization, the irrational felt chillingly plausible. Neither of us slept well that night. The next day dawned cold and gray, a hard frost rhyming the grassland in silver. Our breath plumed in the frigid air as we ate a hasty breakfast and packed up camp. Both of us eager to get moving, to be doing something to keep the unsettling thoughts at bay. As we hiked, the weather remained gloomy, the sky leaden, swollen with unshed moisture. The ponderosas and aspens creaked and rattled in a restless wind. It felt like a storm was building. By midday, when we stopped at an overlook above a wooded gulch to rest and refill our water bottles from our dwindling reserves, the first snowflakes had begun to swirl down from the iron clouds, fat and feathery. "That's all we need," Jack muttered, frowning up at the sky as he screwed the cap back on his bottle. "Hiking in the snow is miserable, and dangerous if it starts really coming down." I nodded my agreement, already feeling the cold seeping through my layers. "Maybe we should think about heading back," I suggested, stamping my numb feet. "If this keeps up, the trail could get hard to follow." But Jack was already shaking his head, his expression resolute. "We've come this far. I'm not turning back now. Besides, a little snow never hurt anyone." He shouldered his pack and started off down the trail again without waiting for my response. With a resigned sigh, I fell in behind him. He was right that we had come a long way, and the thought of retracing all those miles back to the SUV was dispiriting. But I couldn't shake the sense that pushing on was unwise, that it was tempting fate. The snow continued to fall as we hiked, growing steadier and thicker as the afternoon wore on until everything was blanketed in white. It muffled all sound, made the forest seem even more still and lifeless. Our steps were hushed, the only noise the soft whisper of snowflakes. As the light began to fade, we came upon a small clearing, little more than a gap in the trees. Jack called a halt, shrugging off his pack. "This looks like as good a place as any to camp for the night," he said, surveying our surroundings. "It's getting too dark to go much further anyway." I wasn't thrilled at the prospect. The clearing was exposed, hemmed in by dense, gloomy stands of spruce. Anything could be hiding in those shadows, but the alternative of continuing to stumble onward blindly through a snowstorm had even less appeal. "All right," I agreed. "Let's get a fire going quickly before we freeze." We gathered what dry wood we could, scraped away the snow, and soon had a small, smoky blaze going. In its light and warmth I felt my spirits lift a little. Fire was safety, the one sure ward against all the creatures of the night, both natural and unnatural. But a short while later, as we were settling in to eat some dinner, I thought I heard a branch snap somewhere out in the darkness beyond the ring of firelight. I put down my tin cup of coffee, listened hard. After a long moment, there was another crack, closer this time, then another, like ponderous footsteps. "Jack," I hissed, reaching for the hatchet on my belt. "There's something out there. Listen." He sat up sharply from where he had been reclined against a log, brow furrowing. The steps were drawing nearer, slow and deliberate, and then they stopped, perhaps 30 feet away, just beyond the veil of shadow. A growl sounded then, low and guttural and full of malevolence. The hairs along my arms and on the back of my neck stood up. That was no coyote or mountain lion. I'd never heard any animal make a sound like that. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, leaping to his feet, drawing the big hunting knife from his belt. "Show yourself." For a breathless moment there was only silence. Then, at the very edge of the darkness, 2 points of yellow fire appeared, perhaps 6 feet off the ground. I sucked in a sharp breath. Eyes. They were eyes, feral and intelligent, staring directly at us. As we watched in mute horror, a massive shape detached itself from the blackness and slinked into the flickering half-light at the clearing's edge. It was a wolf, but no ordinary wolf. It was far too large, easily the size of a grown man, with a coat as black as a starless night sky and teeth like gleaming daggers. It stood regarding us with those hellish yellow eyes, head lowered, hackles raised, a nightmarish apparition conjured from our worst imaginings. It was only then that I noticed its front paws. They weren't paws at all. They were gnarled, human-like hands, the fingers tipped with wickedly curved claws. "Skinwalker," Jack breathed, his eyes wide with shock and raw terror. Dear God, the legends are true. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it bone white. His hand shook where it gripped the knife. The beast snarled then, lips curling back from its fangs, and took a step towards us. I scrabbled backwards frantically, nearly pitching into the fire in my haste. This was no myth, no scary story around a campfire. It was real as the stark fear coursing. The creature began to circle us slowly, its baleful yellow eyes never leaving our faces, stalking, toying with its prey. Low growls rumbled continuously from its barrel chest, setting our teeth on edge. The stench of it reached us even over the smoke, a charnel reek of rotting flesh and decay. What do we do?" I stammered, my heart slamming against my ribs as I gripped my hatchet with white knuckles. "I don't know," Jack replied hoarsely. He licked his lips, shifted his grip on the hunting knife. "The stories say the only way to defeat a skinwalker is to call it by its human name, but we don't know its name." The beast snarled as if in response, a horrifyingly intelligent sound, as though it understood our words and found them amusing. Then, to our shock and revulsion, it opened its maw and spoke, its voice a rasping abomination. "Fools," it grated. "There is no escape. Your flesh will feed my hunger." It lunged then, a lightning blur of obsidian fur and flashing teeth. Jack slashed desperately with his knife, but the creature batted his arm aside with contemptuous ease, sending him sprawling. Blood flew in spatters across the snow. I heard myself screaming as I stumbled backwards, raising my hatchet. The skinwalker's head whipped towards me, yellow eyes blazing with malevolent glee. It gathered itself to spring, and I knew with sick certainty I was about to die. But in that moment, just as the beast tensed to leap, a ululating war cry split the night, and a dark man-shaped figure burst from the trees behind it. The skinwalker spun with a startled snarl. I caught a glimpse of an aged, dark-skinned face, obsidian eyes, a braid of gray hair, and the glint of a steel tomahawk arcing down. The strange newcomer and the creature crashed together in a writhing tangle of flailing limbs and gnashing teeth, rolling across the snowy ground in mortal combat. Hideous screams and enraged roars rent the air. Blood sprayed. I stood paralyzed, hatchet still raised but forgotten, unable to tear my eyes away from the titanic struggle. The grizzled man, whomever he was, fought with a savage fury, hacking and slashing with the tomahawk. But the skinwalker was monstrously strong and fast. It raked the man's face and chest with its claws, staining the snow crimson. Locked in their death grapple, the pair smashed into the campfire, sending burning logs tumbling and throwing up a geyser of spark and ash. The man cried out in pain as his clothes caught fire, but he never released his chokehold on the skinwalker. With his other hand, he grabbed a flaming brand and shoved it into the creature's snarling mouth. It screamed, high and terrible. At last, the man managed to pin the beast beneath him and began to chant something in a language I did not know, the words guttural and clipped. It sounded like some sort of Native American tongue. The skinwalker thrashed and howled, its huge body contorting grotesquely as if in agony. The chanting grew louder, more fevered, the strange words tumbling over each other. The skinwalker convulsed spastically, yellow eyes bulging from their sockets. Then, with one last ear-splitting shriek, it shuddered and lay still, black tongue lolling. For a long, breathless moment, the only sound was the harsh panting of the old warrior where he crouched over the monster's corpse. Then he straightened slowly, wincing, and turned to face us. In the guttering light of the scattered campfire, I saw that his leathery face was crisscrossed with bloody furrows from the thing's claws. "It is done," he said in heavily accented English. "The skinwalker is dead." He kicked at the inert mass of black fur with a moccasined foot. "Who? What? How?" I babbled, staggering over to help a groaning Jack to his feet. His left arm hung limp and blood soaked his shredded sleeve, but he was alive. The old man held up a hand. "I am John Blackfeather of the Navajo Nation. I have tracked this skinwalker for many days. It has killed many, and I swore to end its evil." He hawked and spat. "It was once a shaman of my tribe, the most powerful of his generation, but he trafficked with dark spirits, made pacts with things that should never be named. The tribe cast him out, but it was too late. He had already transformed himself into the beast you saw." Blackfeather shook his head sadly. "A skinwalker cannot be killed by any normal means once it has tasted human flesh and absorbed the power of men's fear. Only a holy man can slay it by speaking its true name. The name it bore is a man, and its name must be spoken in the tongue of its people as the holy man spills its blood." I looked down at the skinwalker's lifeless body, still struggling to wrap my mind around what I had seen. Even dead and reverting slowly to human form, it radiated a sense of otherworldly malevolence and wrongness. "Thank you," Jack said then, his voice ragged with pain and exhaustion. "You saved our lives." The old warrior nodded gravely. "You two are brave to venture so deep into this wilderness, but you must learn to heed the ancient wisdom. There are things out here in the shadows that modern men have forgotten, things that hunger for human blood and fear nothing but the old ways. Remember this lesson." With those cryptic words, John Blackfeather turned and vanished into the snowy trees as abruptly as he had appeared, leaving Jack and I to bind our wounds and try to make sense of the impossible horror we had just witnessed. One thing I knew for certain: I would never again mock the power of legend and myth. The stories were true, and I had seen the proof with my own terrified eyes. The skinwalker was real. Dawn eventually arrived, gray and joyless. The events of the night before seemed like some surreal nightmare in the pale morning light. Maybe they had been. Maybe my mind had snapped out here in the wilderness and conjured the whole thing from some dark recess of ancestral memory and primal fear. But the wounds on Jack's arm, and the blood-stained snow where the skinwalker's body had lain, told a different story. It had been real as the aches in my muscles and the chattering of my teeth. We broke camp early, moving slowly and saying little. My desperate backward scramble last night had upended my pack, scattering much of our food in the snow. The skinwalker's corpse had mercifully dissolved away to oily ashes and a few gnawed bones in the night. Small blessing. Jack looked gaunt and feverish, his skin waxy as he cradled his injured arm. He needed a doctor and antibiotics. Not another day staggering through the mountains. We have to get you out of here, I said as we shouldered our packs. That cut could get infected. He nodded weakly but said nothing, saving his energy. His breath plumed in the frigid air. In unspoken agreement, we angled back the way we had come, retracing our steps on the snow-shrouded trail. Navigation was difficult with our map and compass lost somewhere in the chaos. But I reckoned if we kept the rising sun at our backs, we would eventually reach the forest road where we had started. Time passed in a blur of putting one foot in front of the other. My world narrowed to the crunch of snow underfoot, the saw of Jack's labored breathing, and the throb of sore muscles. My mind churned endlessly, trying in vain to make rational sense of the night's lunatic events. By noon we had made scarcely a few miles, slowed by exhaustion, cold, and Jack's deteriorating condition. We stopped beneath a stand of towering firs to rest, and I changed the makeshift bandage on his arm, wincing at the sight of inflamed flesh. The gashes already stank, blood poisoning. He was going downhill fast. As I tucked the last corner of a strip of torn shirt around the wound, Jack suddenly gripped my wrist with his good hand, his eyes glassy with pain locked on mine. "If I don't make it," he said in a rasping whisper, "you have to tell people what happened out here, what we saw. Don't let them call us crazy. The truth has to be known." "You're going to make it just fine," I said with forced cheer, patting his hand. "We both are. This will all just be a bad memory soon." But my words rang hollow even to my own ears. If we didn't find help and shelter soon, we likely wouldn't survive another frigid night in the open, not in our current state. And beneath my fear, questions roiled like acid. How many other myths were true? What other impossible horrors stalked the shadows of the ancient places? And most chilling, what if there had been more than one skinwalker? Another hour of arduous travel brought us to the edge of a narrow gorge. A rift cleaved in the earth 10 yards wide and 30 deep. Snow-flocked pines swayed on the far side above a thin silver ribbon of a stream. The only way forward was across a rickety-looking makeshift bridge of lashed logs spanning the gap. Jack leaned against a boulder, clutching his arm and looking dubiously at the crude structure. "That doesn't exactly inspire confidence," he said between pained breaths. "Where did it even come from out here?" "Probably some old logging access," I replied, eyeing the weathered timbers uneasily. "Hunters and trappers might use it to get across too." I didn't mention the other possibility that had slithered unbidden into my mind, that the skinwalker or others of its kind had built it for some darker purpose. The thought of putting my weight on something created by those unclean hands made my skin crawl, but there was no other choice. We couldn't go around, and backtracking would cost hours we didn't have. Testing the bridge's strength with a foot, I took a deep breath and stepped out onto it. The lashed logs held, barely. Heart in my throat, I picked my way across, placing each step with care on the icy, uneven surface. The bridge swayed and creaked alarmingly, but did not give way. After a minor eternity, I reached solid ground again, and turned to beckon Jack. "Come on," I called. "Just go slow and you'll be fine. Don't look down." Clenching his jaw, he started across, even more slowly than I had. Twice a foot slipped on a slick patch and nearly pitched him over the flimsy railing to the jagged rocks below, drawing a yelp. But at last he made it, collapsing onto a tree trunk on the far side. I squeezed his good shoulder. "You made it. Hard part's over. We'll find a spot to camp on this side soon." He nodded, closing his eyes as he fought to slow his breathing. I let him rest a few minutes before hauling him to his feet again. As deep as we were, I had a gnawing fear that night would bring fresh horrors. I wanted as much distance as possible between us and that bridge and the fell things that might cross it. But Jack's strength was fading fast, his steps growing increasingly unsteady, his skin burning hot to the touch. He was pushing the edge of collapse. I kept a grip on his belt, terrified he would topple headfirst down the slope at any moment. The light was beginning to slant low through the trees again. Deja vu chilled my veins. And then, miraculously, I glimpsed a flash of color through the tree trunks ahead. A swath of bright green amid the blacks and grays and whites. Out of place. Unnatural. A tent. Hope leapt in my chest. With a burst of energy I didn't know I still possessed, I hauled Jack forward, and we half staggered, half slid down into a small hollow ringed by towering firs. There, tucked against the hillside, stood a dome tent, wisps of smoke curling from the vent. A hiker's camp, salvation. "Hello," I shouted, or tried to shout, my voice emerging as a thready croak. "Is anyone there? We need help." Seconds passed. Then the tent flap unzipped, and a figure emerged. A woman, bundled in a purple parka, her honey blonde hair spilling out from under a knit cap. She peered at us with wary blue eyes. "Please," I said. "My friend needs a doctor. There was an accident." Her expression softened then, taking in our haggard appearance. Jack's blood-stained jacket. "Dear God," she breathed. "Of course, come on. Let's get him inside." Between us, we half-carried Jack into the blessed warmth of the tent. He collapsed onto a sleeping bag, groaning. The woman, who introduced herself as Alice, began rummaging through her pack for a first aid kit. "What happened?" she asked, pulling out bandages and antiseptic. "Was it a bear?" I barked a humorless laugh. "I wish. You wouldn't believe me if I told you." She paused, gauze in hand, and looked at me searchingly. "Try me," she said. "I've spent a lot of time in these woods. I've heard things, seen things." So as she cleaned and rebandaged Jack's wounds, I told her everything. The footprint, the sense of being watched, the impossible creature that had attacked us in the night, John Blackfeather's harrowing rescue and dire warning. By the end, my voice was hoarse, and Alice's face was pale. "Skinwalkers," she whispered when I had finished. "I had heard the old stories, but I never dreamed." She shook her head. "You two are lucky to be alive. The tribes say their dark magic is almost unstoppable." She touched the small silver cross at her throat. "I thought it was all just myth and superstition." "So did we," I said grimly, watching the shadows gather outside the tent. "Believe me, we won't be so quick to dismiss legends around the campfire anymore." Alice insisted we stay in her tent for the night. In truth, I doubt Jack could have gone much farther anyway. She had a satellite phone and promised to call for a medevac chopper first thing in the morning. But as darkness fell and the wind moaned in the treetops, I found no comfort in the nylon walls and battery lanterns. Because if the legends of skinwalkers were real, who knew what other primal nightmares lurked in the vast primordial forests beyond? And so I sat sleepless, gripping my hatchet, jumping at every noise, until the pale light of dawn crept in, and with it the distant thrum of helicopter blades. But even as we lifted off and left that accursed wilderness behind, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I would never feel truly safe in the woods again. Because some things once seen can never be unseen. The skinwalkers are out there, waiting in the shadows, as they have always been and will always be. I only pray you never meet one. I stared out the window of my apartment at the twinkling city lights, their usual bustle and glow bringing none of the old comfort. 3 months had passed since that nightmarish camping trip. 3 months since my safe, familiar world had shattered and reformed itself into something darker, more primal. True to Alice's word, a rescue helicopter had lifted us out of the White Mountains at first light and rushed Jack to the nearest hospital. I had never been so glad to see sterile white walls and hear the beep of monitors. The doctors had been baffled by the ragged claw wounds streaping his flesh and the virulence of the infection raging in his veins. They pumped him full of the most potent antibiotics and muttered about unusual animal attacks. I said nothing to contradict them. What could I say? That we had been savaged by a mythical monster out of Native American folklore. They'd have had me committed. Jack eventually recovered, at least physically, though the wounds left livid scars. Invisible scars, too. He was jumpy now, easily startled. He had taken to triple-checking the locks on his doors and windows. Understandable, given what we had faced, but I worried. As for me, I found my thoughts returning again and again to that long, terror-filled night in the forest and the impossibility made manifest that had haunted it. In the bright light of civilization it seemed unreal, a fever dream, and yet the very real evidence of Jack's injuries and my own still healing bruises argued otherwise. So I did what I had always done when confronted with the unknown. I researched. I delved into the old stories, the oral histories passed down by the Apache and Navajo. I read ethnographies and explorers' journals and obscure folklore tracts. and what I found there chilled me to my marrow. If even a fraction of the tales were true, Skinwalkers were far from the only horrors stalking the untamed places of the world. Wendigos and Rakshas, Baconechos and Adlets, 1,000 different names for 1,000 nightmares given flesh. According to the legends, these beings dwelt in the liminal spaces, the borders between the civilized world and the primordial wilderness that modern humanity had all but forgotten. They were shapeshifters and flesh-eaters, driven by an insatiable hunger for human meat and fear. Some had once been human themselves, transformed through dark sorceries and corrupted communion with evil spirits. Others had never been human at all. As I read account after terrifying account, a chilling realization crept over me, that all of human history and progress was little more than a thin veneer over a vast dark abyss teeming with primordial horrors. An abyss that we had convinced ourselves did not exist, could not exist. The uncharted places on the map, literally and figuratively, that's where they lurked still, waiting for the unwary to stray beyond the firelight. Reading those old myths and legends, I understood at last the true nature of those ancestral fears that dwelt in the shadowed corners of the human psyche. The instinctive dread of the dark, the atavistic shiver up the spine at a snapped twig or a flash of moonlit eyes in the night. They were not irrational after all. The monsters were real. Perhaps they always had been. Our ancestors had known that terrible truth, but we, their descendants, had allowed ourselves to forget, lulled by the false security of our cities and our science. But some truths could never be forgotten, not entirely. They seeped into our dreams and our stories, a warning from the past to the future. I wish now that I had heeded those warnings, that I had not been so arrogant as to dismiss the wisdom of ages as mere superstition. It was an arrogance that had nearly gotten Jack and I killed, and I knew with grim certainty that there would be others who ventured innocently into the wild places only to discover the nightmares that waited there, with no aged Navajo warrior to save them. So now I sit here, watching the city lights and the oblivious millions they represent, and I ponder my newfound terrible knowledge. Do I sound the alarm? Try to tell the world that the monsters of myth are real? They'd call me mad. But then, a sane man in an insane world must appear insane. Or do I merely learn from my experience and retreat to the dubious safety of civilization's light, never again to venture into the wilderness where the old ways and the old things still hold sway? It is a tempting thought. The easier path, certainly. But I know that is not my way, nor Jack's. Though his scars are still so raw, someone must keep watch on the borders, literal and metaphorical. Someone must remember the truth and be prepared to face the horrors that stalk the night. For they are still out there, in the forests and the mountains, the deserts and the hidden places, hungering. And if there was one skinwalker, who is to say there are not more? Or things worse than skinwalkers? The thought chills my blood, but it is a fear I must master. For I know now that I can never again dwell comfortably in the everyday world, not fully. I have seen beyond the veil, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. So I will go back to the wild places, seeking out the dark corners of the map, to learn and to guard in whatever small way I can. It is a hard and lonely path I have chosen, but I see no other way. The monsters are real, and the world sleeps unaware. Someone must keep the watch, and so I will. God help me, I will.